Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Malloy, and this is Lecture 15.1, the Geographic Setting of China. And unless I tell you otherwise on the screen, write everything down that you see written on the screen in your notes. So here we go. All right, we the Chinese call our country Zhongguo, or Middle Kingdom. The Chinese for centuries knew no other world than China. For thousands of years, no other highly developed culture than their own. The realm of the Han, or the Chinese, was the center of civilization, the center of the earth, as quoted by a Chinese historian and a guide at the Temple of Heaven in Beijing. This is a fairly interesting quote from your textbook. What exactly does it mean? Well, clearly, the early Chinese felt that they were the center of the world and felt an immense amount of pride for their accomplishments. This idea of a China as Middle Kingdom is going to persist for thousands of years and will lead to many isolationist foreign policy practices throughout time by the Chinese, in my opinion. But why did this theory develop? Well, I think the answer can be found in part by looking at China's geographic setting. China's location and diverse geographic landforms have contributed to this notion that China was, in fact, the Middle Kingdom. China is located on the Asian continent and is bordered by Russia and Mongolia to the north. It also borders North Korea to the northeast. East of China is the Yellow Sea, East China Sea, South China Sea, which are all part of the Pacific Ocean. With such a large portion of the eastern side of China located along the ocean, I think it's safe to assume that life in many parts of the nation continue to revolve around trade and fishing. China is bordered to the southwest and west by the Southeast Asian nations of Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, formerly called Burma, and the South Asian nations of Bhutan, India, Nepal, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. And I think one of you asked me what "stan" meant at some point, and I remember in class telling you I wasn't exactly sure. But I guess that it must come from some common language root, and most likely meant country or land. Well, upon further research, I have discovered that I wasn't too far off. Many people in these Stan nations speak languages that are of Indo-European origin. Almost 90% of the world's languages are of Indo-European origin, including English and other Germanic languages. Another Indo-European language is Persian, also called Farsi today, and is spoken in Iran. Next year, as 10th graders, you're going to learn all about ancient Persia and the Persian Empire and all the places that made up its territory. Consequently, the Persians had a great deal of influence over that part of the world, language-wise. So the suffix stan actually means place or land in Persian. So there you go. I guess what we really need to remember here is that China is bordered to the west by many of these Stan nations, and I think that we can assume that the Persian Empire stretched all the way to China long ago, right? But why didn't the Persians extend their empire into China? What prevented them from doing this? An interesting question. Yeah, what types of geographic features might make it difficult to expand one's empire? Yeah, maybe say a mountain range or desert, perhaps. You've already learned from your map activity on China that mountain ranges like the Himalayas, the Tibetan Plateau, as well as the mountain ranges called the Kunlun Shan, the Tian and Altan Shan, border China to the northwest and the west. The massive Gobi Desert stretches across much of the north, where China borders Mongolia. The Tibetan Plateau borders the Himalayas and is sparsely populated. Could mountains, deserts, and plateaus create circumstances that have isolated China throughout history? Of course. How did China change this situation? Well, we'll soon be discussing a group of people called the Mongols, but more on that later, okay? So perhaps the isolating effects of mountain ranges, deserts, and high plateaus all contributed to China's near isolation from other parts of the world. You know, China is the third largest nation in the world, geographically speaking. But with almost 1.3 billion inhabitants, they must be pretty crowded, right? Well, actually, much of China is sparsely populated, believe it or not. 80% of China is mountainous, and only 7% of its land is arable or farmable. Most of that land is located along the eastern portion of the country. So what exactly does this mean? Well, I'm going to take a wild guess here, but I think it's safe to assume that China is most densely populated in the east. And yes, that is what your book says. Most people in China are actually farmers, and they live in areas where they can survive by growing food. We already know and have learned this year that civilizations almost always emerge along rivers and river valleys where soil is fertile and can support or grow enough food, and then some, for its population. In order for any society to advance, they must be able to produce a food surplus, or they will always worry about where their next meal is coming from instead of making technological advances. We learned that from Jared Diamond, remember? The Neolithic Revolution, etc. Right, so most people in China inhabit an area of land along the eastern portion of the nation. The map in this presentation clearly shows the population density in this part of China compared to the less populated areas in the north and the west. And I think it's safe to assume that there must be rivers and fertile land in those regions where most people seem to be living. So today, there also must be big or densely populated cities there as well, right? Okay, well, there are 6 main regions in China that we're going to talk about next. The first region is called North China, and the second region is called South China. These regions stretch along the eastern portion of the nation and are areas that support most of the farming, as well as where most people in China live today. There are also 4 other regions of China that include less populated areas. These regions include number 3, the Northeast, number 4, Mongolia, which includes an independent nation now called Mongolia. It should be noted that part of the territory is disputed territory and controlled by the Chinese. And the 5th and 6th regions include the Xinjiang region and the Xizang regions. These are rural, more desolate areas that have smaller populations. However, many parts of these regions have abundant mineral resources. China's government has recently offered many people incentives to move to these less populated regions in order to relieve some of the pressure placed on eastern cities. China has also allowed people more children in these regions, but more on the one-child policy later, okay? China is geographically diverse. People have adapted to their individual environments over time. People learn to adapt to their physical surroundings in order to survive. And with only 7% of China's land available to farm and over 1 billion people to feed, farming has always been a bit of a challenge. Many Chinese farmers have actually adapted to this challenge, and a great example of this adaptation is terrace farming, in which farmers literally carve out the sides of hilly land, flattening the areas in order to get more farmable land. And this creates sort of a staircase effect. So despite geographic isolation and diverse landscape, China has found ways to trade and have contact with people throughout history. And one of the first civilizations to emerge in China was located along the Yellow River or the Huang He River. Rivers have served as an important transportation route, or important transportation routes, I should say, and irrigation sources in Chinese history. There are 3 major river systems in China that have influenced their culture and way of life, and civilizations are going to emerge along these 3 river systems and along these river valleys. The first is obviously the Huang He, again, and it's named after the color of the nutrient-rich soil called the LOESS, which is carried to the river by the wind, and that's why the river is sort of a yellow-brownish color. The Huang He is also known as the River of Sorrow due to its frequent flooding that has cost many people their lives throughout history. Now, the second river system is the Chang River, which is also called the Yangtze or Yangste River. It has a large port near Shanghai, which has resulted in lots of trade throughout history. Indeed, Shanghai is still one of the largest centers of trade in the world. The Chinese are going to actually build a dam along the Yangtze River. They're going to build the Three Gorges Dam. And so they're going to build this along, the Chang River and Yangtze River for hydroelectric power. And with so many people in their nation, energy is always a concern. The Three Gorges Dam is an important clean energy source in China. However, the creation of this massive structure, it was a major undertaking, and it changed the environment in many ways. Its construction was controversial because there were some environmental concerns. These included having flooded a huge region of land and burying historical and archaeological sites when they built the dam, as well as, they displaced millions of people from their homes in the area that they flooded. All right, well, the third river system is the Qi River, or the Xi River, and it's also called the Jiang or the Pearl River. The Xi River flows through the South China region to the port city of Guangzhou, or Guangzhou. And if I mispronounce anything here, I'm really sorry, I don't speak Chinese. And Guangzhou has become a major world trading city, as well as a very cosmopolitan area, as seen by its modern skyscrapers. So take a look at the skyline there, and you'll see it looks every bit as modern, if not more modern, than New York City. So what can we learn from this? Well, we know that these three rivers that make up the Chinese river systems, the Chinese rivers continue, even today, to play an important role in people's lives and are sources not only of irrigation for farming, but also for transportation and trade. In addition to China's location, regions, and river systems, China's ethnic makeup and language groups are fascinating, and they reflect geographic boundaries in many ways. 95% of people in China are of ethnic Han background. Most of these people inhabit the eastern portion of the nation. However, there are ethnic minorities that exist in China as well, and these usually these minority groups are inhabiting more rural areas, and they include the Mongols, the Tibetans, and the Tajiks. Well, China's language groups also reflect its various regions, and there have been various dialects that have emerged over time in these regions. And although they have many languages, there are really two primary dialects of the Chinese language. There's Mandarin and Cantonese. Mandarin is the official language of China, and it's used everywhere. So it's the official language of China. Both Mandarin and Cantonese are actually written almost the same way for the most part, but they sound completely different. The Chinese government made Mandarin the official language in order to create a more uniform or standardized Chinese for its society. It just makes things easier with such a large population. Cantonese today is spoken mostly in the South and really reflects a lot of cultural values. So there you have it. You've got two primary languages, and then of course you have, with those two primary languages, you also have various other languages spoken by certain ethnic groups. All right, well, let's summarize today's lecture. Number one, what have we learned? China's location has helped to shape its view of the world. Secondly, today we have learned that China's population is unevenly distributed due to various landforms. The east is more suitable for farming. And finally, we have learned that its three rivers, or three primary rivers, I should say, has supported a number of early civilizations and settlement, and they continue to shape life there today. Thanks for listening. Bye, everyone.